The House will come to order. Let the House be in order. Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this ends yet another week for the House of Representatives without consideration of a meaningful jobs bill.
Speaker, that's not order.
More meaningfully, though, this concludes another week where a nightmare is about to come true for our constituents. This is another week without a paycheck for a lot of Americans. It might be the week that their unemployment benefits expire. This might be the day that someone shuts down their small business and closes the doors for the last time. This might be the week that the foreclosure notice is executed and someone loses their home. This has been a bad week for a lot of Americans. It's been a bad time for a lot of Americans. But what they have lost is not simply their job, not simply their business, not simply their health insurance or their pension. Many of our neighbors have lost their basic faith that America's fair. Mr. Speaker, 50% of the American people recently surveyed said the American dream was either dead or on life support. They see in the halls of big institutions, they see on Wall Street, and they see on the halls of Congress a basic sense that America's not fair anymore. That the basic deal that if you work as hard as you can, give as much as you can, and do as much as you can, that you can go as far as your abilities will take you. Too many of our constituents no longer believe that. My motion makes what I believe is an improvement to a good bill. I'm going to support this bill that says that no small business person should have to make an interest-free loan to the federal government to do business with the government. I think that's exactly right. But here's the improvement it makes. It recognizes that some who would take advantage of that provision are taking advantage of our tax system and not paying their fair share. When I say not paying their fair share, I'm not talking about a policy argument about tax rates. I'm talking about someone who is delinquent on their taxes and cheating the rest of us. So when someone looks at their pay envelope this afternoon and sees what's taken out in FICA and federal withholding tax, they're paying their fair share. Some like it, many do not, but they're paying their fair share. Why should it be that someone who's not paying their fair share to support this country should take advantage of this very good bill? I say they shouldn't. So my improvement to this bill is very simple. If you run a barber shop or a software company or a delicatessen or a manufacturing plant, you no longer have to make an interest-free loan to the government to do business with the government. I agree with that, and I salute the authors of the bill. But if you are delinquent on your taxes, if you haven't paid your fair share, if you're cheating the rest of the community, then you may not take advantage of this opportunity. This amendment is not just about improving the revenue flow of the federal government. It's about making the country a little more fair again. It's about saying that those who follow the rules are small businesses, are middle-class citizens. Those who follow the rules can take advantage of the law. But those who do not follow the rules may not take advantage of the law. I think the American people want to see that in big hospitals and insurance companies. I think they want to see that on Wall Street, and I think they want to see it right here on the floor of this chamber. So let's cast a vote today not just for an improvement to this bill, but let's make America a little more fair. Let's make the American dream a little more alive. Let's stand for the proposition that those who play by the rules benefit from the rules, but those who break the rules do not. The question raised, colleagues, by this amendment is this: where do you stand? Do you stand with small businesses and middle-class people who follow the rules, or do you follow with those who would violate the rules and pillage the American system? The American people have had enough of this. We need to do far more than this to restore fairness to our country, but this is a good start. I would urge a yes vote on this motion.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw my point of order and seek time in opposition to the motion.
The gentleman's reservation is withdrawn. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The underlying bill that we're talking about here today, which repeals the 3% across-the-board rule, is co-sponsored by two-thirds of this House. This bill has been endorsed by the President of the United States, as is. And when the current minority was in the majority in the stimulus bill, they offered this exact legislation, full repeal, without any complications. And then when the final version came over, it was full repeal for 1 year, without any changes or complications. I obviously am in strong opposition to this motion to recommit. Then we get the analysis from the Joint Committee on Taxation, which says, in typical understatement from the Joint Committee, your proposal poses some administrative difficulties. Some? The burden is going to be on state and local governments to figure out which contractors are or are not delinquent. And either there's a violation of taxpayer privacy, which I don't think anybody in this House would support, a violation of Rule 6103, or very complex procedures are going to have to be put in place for governments to figure out which contractors are in compliance and which aren't. As the Joint Committee on Taxation goes on to say, the IRS would need to build the infrastructure to handle the volume of requests from state and local government entities. Implementation difficulties limit somewhat the revenue gain from withholding on state and local governments. This is more complication in the tax code. It goes against what a majority of this House wants to do. It goes against what the President of the United States wants to do. Vote no on this motion to recommit.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. No. The noes
Speaker.
have it. The motion is not.
Mr. Speaker, and I would ask for recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise.
Thanks, Sherry.
A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage. This is a 15-minute vote.
A few minutes ago, the House passed a bill that would overturn a provision in the 2010 health care overhaul to expand eligibility for some benefits, including Medicaid and subsidies to buy health insurance. That bill would help pay for this one. Well, this is the motion to recommit on a bill that would repeal a 3% government withholding on federal contractor payments. This is the motion recommit made by Representative Andrews of New Jersey, which would deny relief to companies that are found delinquent in paying their federal taxes. This vote is 15 minutes. A vote on the bill itself is coming up next. Lots of talk about jobs in that debate. And coming up at 11:30 this morning, we'll hear from Speaker Boehner and other Republicans on what they're calling the forgotten 15 bills that have passed the House, they say, but would have not seen Senate action yet. And wrapping up just a few minutes ago on Capitol Hill, the weekly briefing by Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi, and we'll show you as much as we can of that during this vote.
We're meeting here between votes, so it's all about time and how we use it. And it's about time for us to see this super committee narrow its possibilities and reach an agreement. As you know, it's only 4 weeks from yesterday that the deadline of November 23rd must be met. We're hoping that the committee will have an agreement that is big, is bold, and is balanced. And to that end, I have great confidence in the members of the committee that our caucus has sent to that table. Mr. Clyburn, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Becerra have the full confidence of our caucus. They have knowledge, they have judgment, they share the values of our caucus, and they know that we want to have an agreement, a big agreement. Our caucus stood with the President in his big agreement in the summer. That's how we'd like to see the committee go. As we watch the proceedings, that we're not just watching and waiting, we are working. I'm very proud that when the President released his American Jobs Act, which we hope the majority will take the time to bring to the floor, that we have requested respectfully that our members meet with as many small business owners in their districts as possible. In a matter of weeks, they've reached thousands of small business owners to review the President's proposals, to ask for suggestions from the business owners, and also to put it in the context of a proposal that should be on the table for the super committee. When I appointed our members to the committee, we said we wanted something that reflected the entrepreneurial spirit of America. That is reflected in the courage and optimism of our small businesses to take that leap, and we want, again, the work there to start with the creation of jobs. We think small business is the path to that. Entrepreneurialism should be respected and rewarded, and then look at the tax code and the spending and savings decisions that have to be made in light of how we grow the economy, produce revenues to reduce the deficit, recognizing that if you're going to have entrepreneurial spirit and innovation, that innovation begins in the classroom, and that the importance in our educational investments, whether it's at the community college level for some of the skills that are needed for a trained workforce, or whether it's producing more engineers and the rest to keep America #1. So I'm excited about the prospect, the vulnerability that all of the economies of the world have and our dependence on each other, the leadership role that the United States is expected to play, and the urgency in terms of job creation for the American people all require us to make our best possible effort to have no sacred cows on that table, to go there and to get the job done. We've told our members we want results, and I'm very proud of them and know that they will represent our caucus very well. Again, it's about time we have between votes here, but it's about time that we will not be in January. At a time, any time, having, 6 days on the calendar in January, it really makes you wonder about the schedule. But particularly at this time, when the American people are feeling so much pain, and while I value the time that members spend in their districts, as I mentioned, they've been spending time with small businesses the last break, at some point you have to bring the message home and represent your people, find agreement. You can't do that if everyone is at home. And I think that the American people deserve better than following a holiday break, that on top of that we would have a January where we're 6 days in session in Congress. Again, the world is not waiting. The world is watching to see what we do, but events will overtake us if we do not play our leadership role in the world. So again, it's an unusual time as to what is happening. We have an unusual opportunity. We can do something big here. We can do something big, something bold, something balanced. It has to be that way. And again, we have a great deal of enthusiasm in our caucus. If I may just add a political note, I want to commend our distinguished chairman, Mr. Israel, our chairman. This week we had over 100 candidates come to Washington with all of the idealism and fire and spark to ignite the American dream, to build ladders of opportunity, remove obstacles to success for people who want to work hard and play by the rules. They know what is at stake. They are energized. They give us tremendous momentum, that on top of our being successful in our efforts to accrue the resources necessary to win outraising the Republicans. If I may be allowed a political note at the end. Just in case you would ask, I would anticipate that, since I may have to run out to vote. Yes, sir.
Madam Leader, without acknowledging some of the elements that have been discussed in the super committee, do you think that you could support a plan that changes the inflation adjustment for Social Security and affects Medicare beneficiaries if there was a trade-off of some revenue increases?
What I had said to you before, and I will say it again, is that it's no use asking me about specific things until we see the whole package. It's not fair to say to a senior, you're going to pay more for Social Security, and we're not going to touch a hair on the head of the wealthiest people in our country. It's not fair to say to that senior, by the way, that increased premium that you are paying is now going to be considered revenue. Is now going to be considered revenue. So let's just see a package. Let's not, again, exclude anything. Let's just see how they come. Everybody recognizes the balance that we need to have. And I will...
Could you support the package that Senator Baucus presented as a package?
Recognizing it as Senator Baucus's package. It has many of the elements that we have seen in the other three bipartisan proposals, but Simpson-Bowles, Rutherford-Domenici, Gang of Six. It has many of the initiatives that President Obama had thought he had an agreement with Speaker Boehner on. But again, I'm not making any judgment about any package until I see the fuller package that it is a part of.
Ms. Pelosi, a lot of your colleagues have said that it's unfair that you've been cut out of the super committee discussions. Do you agree with them?
I don't believe that I have been cut out of the super committee discussions. Again, the three people that we have sent to the table have my trust and confidence in that of our caucus. If there are any other meetings that are going on, I hope that they will be in furtherance of people reaching agreements on where they may have some differences, and I hope that that is all constructive. Again, we're not sitting around waiting while this is going on. We are building our jobs and small business entrepreneurial proposal, which you will see next week. And again, I would not have appointed people if I said to them, you go there, sit through the meetings, but I'll decide for the caucus where we're going. I hope that the same discretion and judgment that I have respected my members with is one that is shared by Republican colleagues. I believe if they have the same freedom in the meeting, that we have a better chance of getting the job done.
Can you talk? Go ahead. Are you
Am I
concerned?
inclining toward this way?
Are you concerned that the secrecy of the deliberations will make it difficult for leaders of Congress to build a consensus around a proposal if one is actually agreed to by the committee and presented to Congress?
Well, it cannot be a product of secrecy. You know, they may want to find narrow the issues that will be made, the judgments have to be made over, but that has to be done in a public way. And I think you're absolutely right. In order for our members to embrace this, they have to know more about it and know why it has come to the place that it has. And we hope that it will be, as I say, big, bold, and balanced. But at some point, the discussion has to be more public. As you know, I've called for that in my statement when I appointed the members in this room on other occasions. It is believed by some that it's constructive to weed out or eliminate some debate and just narrow it to what the real decisions will be, and that, as I say, should be in the public domain, not only so that our members know, but so that the American people know what is at stake, what the decisions are, and how people voted on them.
Your colleague, Mr. Hoyer, sent a letter to
And part of the briefing just a short while ago with Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. You'll see all of that later in our schedule and in the video library at cspan.org. We're also covering a briefing on Capitol Hill today with House Speaker John Boehner and other Republicans. They're briefing on what they're calling the forgotten 15 bills passed by the House that GOP members say would create jobs but have not seen Senate action. That's coming up, scheduled for 11:30, probably after this series of votes. And again, we'll have that later in our program schedule for you. And a reminder that on the floor right now, a procedural vote on a bill that repeals a 3% government withholding on federal contractor payments. The final passage vote is next. A short while ago, they passed the pay-for in this, what's called the pay-for, that pays for the repeal, a bill that overturns a provision in the 2010 health care law to expand eligibility for some benefits, including Medicaid and subsidies to buy health insurance. This will be it for legislative work today and for the week for the U.S. House. They are back next week, and the Senate returns next week as well, and they are likely back to finish work on amendments to a measure that contains 3 2012 spending bills, the so-called minibus, which includes several agencies, agriculture, commerce, justice, science, transportation, housing, and urban development. The Senate back next week, and that's on C-SPAN 2. This morning on C-SPAN 2, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is before the House Foreign Relations Committee, and that testimony continues. We're covering it live on C-SPAN 2. Meanwhile, another hearing this morning looks at the Gulf Coast Compensation Fund, which was headed by Kenneth Feinberg last year. He's updating the House Natural Resources Committee, and that's live on C-SPAN 3.
On this vote, ayes 183, nays 235. Motion is not adopted. The question is on the bill, the passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say nay.
Yeas
Gentleman
and
from
nays.
Michigan is recognized.
Ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device.
And this is the final passage vote on a bill that repeals a 3% government withholding on federal contractor payments. It's a 5-minute vote and likely the last recorded vote of the day and of the week. They earlier, a short while ago, passed a bill that would effectively pay for that repeal by overturning a part of the 2010 health care law to expand eligibility for some benefits, some health care benefits, including Medicaid and subsidies to purchase health insurance. That passed by a vote of 262 to 157.
The yeas 405, the nays 16. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have sad news for the House today. I rise to inform the House that we lost a former member of this great institution. He was our friend Howard Wolpe, who served in this body for 14 years and was particularly known for his concern for the poor, unfortunate, and his concern about peace in the world. He was a true patriot, a devoted teacher, and a fine statesman. He was a dear friend of mine and many others with whom he served. He shared our collective love for this great nation and for our state of Michigan. He had an enormous impact upon public policy in Michigan and our country, across the world, which was a positive one. He contributed most of his life to bringing civility to government relations and to making this world a better place, a passion that I was able to witness during his long and distinguished service here. He served Michigan ably and honorably, and went on to serve as the Presidential Special Envoy to Africa's Great Lakes region, where he initiated peace talks and helped to end civil wars in Burundi and in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purposes does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns to meet at 1 p.m. on Monday next.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Thanks.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized.
I rise today to honor the life of Roy Rood, who passed away on October 8th. Roy was a longtime resident and the founding father of my hometown of Tequesta, Florida. Mr. Rood was born in 1918 on a farm in Jupiter, Florida, one of 11 children. He spent his early years on the family dairy farm, where he learned the value of a hard day's work and the love for working outside. The first Tequesta post office was located on his family's property and was placed on maps of that area as a settlement called Rood. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Roy joined the Navy, where he served with honor in World War II as an aviation mechanic on an aircraft carrier that was part of the fleet that participated in the Battle of Guam. Following the war, Roy returned home to Florida, where he started a landscaping business that continues today. Over the past 60 years, Roy Rood helped found the American Legion Post 271, the local Kiwanis Club, the First Bank of Jupiter, and the Jupiter Christian School. The residents of Tequesta are lucky to call Roy Rood as our founding father, and he will be missed. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purposes does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tonight's going to be the 6th game of the World Series, and sports means money and business and jobs. St. Louis economy has been spurred on by the World Series, where they're able to give their employees pay increases or not cut employees because they've had increased sales tax. In the same way with college sports, I want to encourage all the Big East presidents to consider the University of Memphis for membership. Memphis is a major city, home of Federal Express and International Paper and other major companies. We don't have a professional football team in Memphis, so if we get in the Big East, in essence, you are our professional football team, and the city would rally around it, unlike in Dallas and Houston where they have professional teams. And the Big East is known for basketball. And Rick Pitino, the coach of our rival, the University of Louisville, has suggested Memphis should be in the conference to keep the Big East as a primary basketball conference. What a great thing to see Memphis and Louisville again in a conference game. We ought to be beyond just dollars, although Memphis can bring them, but also competitive rivalries that make sport what it has been in the American appetites. I encourage the Big East to include the University of Memphis in its expansion plans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purposes does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it is a great privilege to rise in commendation of Sergeant Robert B. Cowdery, who served our country with great honor and pride. Sergeant Cowdery gave his life for our country on October 13th while attempting a helicopter rescue of his fellow soldiers under fire. Sergeant Cowdery was raised in La Junta, Colorado. He graduated from La Junta High School in 1990. He was a devoted outdoorsman and familyman who enjoyed bow hunting. Cowdery enlisted in the Army in 2003, serving his third tour of duty in Afghanistan at the time of his death. Sergeant Cowdery's duties included flying into active combat zones to deliver medical assistance and rescue troops while under fire. He was highly decorated for his heroic service, earning the Bronze Star and 2 Army commendations for valor. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to Sergeant Cowdery, a selfless American hero whose brave sacrifice for our country is an example of what makes this country great. My thoughts and prayers are with his wife Jill and their 3 sons, Justin, Jacob, and Nathan, and the entire Cowdery family. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purposes does the gentlelady from Texas rise? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to rise to indicate that we have an opportunity to be good Americans and to be the kind of resilient, strong, patriotic nation that all of us love. We love this country. And I gathered this morning with a group of leaders who addressed the question of working issues, union leaders. Every last one of them said, let us create jobs, jobs in America. Part of it could be passing the jobs bill that the President has introduced, dealing with the question of infrastructure. One member who was coming to the meeting said, I was late because of our infrastructure problems. This would create jobs, bring back our law enforcement, police officers, and teachers where classrooms are going up and up and up in size because we don't have enough teachers. And as you well know, the President's announced that we'll be bringing home our valiant troops from Iraq. It's 150,000 of these young people that will need jobs. Let's get them in a training program where they have to get a stipend that will help support them, legislation that I have introduced. This last bill that I had to vote against, it's sad that we would take Medicaid to help our small businesses and our vendors, whereas 2 years ago I voted on it because we used the stimulus funds to do so. There are many pay-fors to help small businesses, but what we need to do is to focus on paying people, Americans, so they can eat and put food on their table, and we need to create jobs and stop taking money from Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. Let's all work together, pull together, balance this budget on the basis of the fact that the nation is not broke. We can do this. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purposes does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, not only can we not wait, we can't afford to wait, and here in the House we haven't waited. With this week's passage of H.R. 1904, the Southeast Arizona Land Exchange and Conservation Act of 2011, and H.R. 674, the repeal of the 3% withholding rule on certain payments made to vendors by government entities, the House chamber now has passed more than 17 job-creating bills in the 112th Congress. H.R. 1904 will boost development of our nation's copper resources, generating billions in new revenues and creating new environments for economic growth. Much like the costly Form 99 requirements that we succeeded in repealing earlier this year, the 3% withholding rule would impose substantial new burdens on cash-strapped employers, impeding cash flows and further undermining job creation. Passage of H.R. 674 will not only create jobs, it will relieve federal, state, and local governments of the need to comply with unfunded administrative burdens that the rule would impose. Mr. Speaker, not only can we not wait, we cannot afford to wait, and here in the House we haven't waited. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purposes does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Address the House floor for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, on October 12, 2011, the House took an important step in addressing the alarming number of unemployed veterans currently living within the United States by passing the Veterans Opportunity to Work Act. Known as the VOW Act, this legislation will confront the rising unemployment problems that our veterans in the U.S. are facing. Providing veterans of past eras with additional training benefits ensuring that all transitioning service members to a transition assistance program, and by strengthening protections under USERRA for our National Guard and Reserve troops. As a father of 3 sons currently serving in the United States Army, I have a deep appreciation for the service our men and women in uniform have given to this country. Additionally, one of my priorities when I came to Washington was to ensure that when our troops return home, they have jobs and a strong economy to come to. This legislation is a great first step in fulfilling our responsibilities to all veterans who have sacrificed much on behalf of this nation. With that in mind, I was proud to support the passage of the VOW Act, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Section 3B of House Resolution 448, H.R. 2576 is laid upon the table. The Chair is prepared to recognize a member of the Majority Party for 1 hour. For what purposes does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unprepared remarks today, but I want to talk about Yucca Mountain. We've heard a lot of talk this week about the presidential candidates and Yucca Mountain. America needs to realize that South Carolina and the Savannah River site is currently holding all of the legacy weapons product material that came out of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Plutonium sitting in my state, in my district, that is slated to go under past agreements to Yucca Mountain. It's the right place. America needs to bring Yucca Mountain back online, and let's take the legacy weapons products out of South Carolina and put it in a long-term storage facility. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For going on a couple of months now, we've been hearing the President say we need to pass his jobs bill. Pass his jobs bill right away, right now. Pass his jobs bill. And it was so ironic to have a President of the United States who says he wants to work with the members of Congress, but members of Congress won't work with him. And in his purported effort to work with members of Congress, he doesn't ask to sit down with Congress in a private meeting and talk about these issues. Oh, no. That would really show an intent to work with Congress, to sit down in a room where we can visit about the issues. That would be really working with Congress. Instead, what we have from the President of the United States is a demand. Now, I'm not sure historically, Mr. Speaker, how many times a President of the United States has just decided to just throw a little hissy fit and I'm going to come talk to Congress. Well, we know that he was an instructor. He wasn't a professor, but an instructor. You can be an instructor in law school if you practice law on the side, or a community organizer on the side, or whatever, and they'll let you come teach a course or two. And so anybody who has been involved in a law school, you would think, even as a law instructor, would know that the Constitution makes very clear the President of the United States has no right nor moral authority to demand to come speak in the House. Now, the President would never give credit to the willingness of this Congress to vote unanimously to allow the President, after his little hissy fit, to come speak in the House, but we did. He demanded to come speak to the House. He has to have an invitation to do that. In social circles, if somebody demanded to come to someone's house, I demand an invitation to come lecture you in your house, most people would say, forget it. But this House, controlled by Republican members, majority here Republican, Democrat majority down in the Senate, we voted unanimously. There were no objections to inviting the President to come lecture us rather than sit down and try this.
Would the gentleman yield?
I certainly will yield to my friend from Texas.
I just wanted to thank you for taking this time to speak on this subject. I think it's commendable that you would do that, and I think you're exactly right. And I would encourage you to keep telling the truth as you know it, and how proud we are of you in the Texas delegation, and certainly in East Texas, where you represent that part of the state so well. So keep up the good work.
Well, that's so unexpected and unnecessary, and it actually means a great deal. Thank you. Well, somebody that's been here slugging it out longer than I would ever be able to handle, but Mr. Barton from Texas came as a young man, and he's been able to endure the slings and arrows through many, many years of being in the minority. And we're back to dealing with a White House who wants, he says, to negotiate, to work with Congress, and does so by demanding to come talk to Congress, and comes. Did we have a warm, friendly meeting here as the President stood here on the second level? Well, actually, we got lectured. We were lectured that we needed to pass the President's jobs bill right away, 16, 17 times. Just got to do it now. During the speech, I don't recall the President ever saying, I really don't have a bill. I don't have a bill. And in fact, if you want to sit down and work with me, you won't be able to, because in the morning I'm getting on Air Force One, funded by the taxpayers, and basically hit the campaign trail, and I'm going to be beating up on you guys in the House of Representatives for not being willing to negotiate with me, even though I'm not around. And by the way, I'm not going to negotiate even if we sat down, because you've got to take my bill completely, pass the whole thing, not going to compromise on anything. That was the message for a number of weeks. Take it, pass it as it is. Never mind the fact that he didn't have a bill when he hit the road and was condemning Congress for not passing his bill. That's just strange. You would think if somebody really wants to work with Congress, really wants to do something for the people of America that are hurting. Now, I've had 4 job fairs in East Texas, and I've gone to each one, and it breaks your heart. There are people in their 50s and 60s. There's a lot of young people, the bigger percentage of young people, but there are older people, tremendous experience, tremendous education and training, been laid off because of the bad economy. And it's heartbreaking even more so because this Congress and this President have to take responsibility for continuing to put more and more laws, regulations, burdens on business that keep them from being able to retain jobs, keep them from being able to expand and create more jobs. And when you hear from people who've lost their job And they're not only brokenhearted, but they're upset. Because then they find out that this administration has done things like throw $600 million at Solyndra, has spent millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars to create jobs. One giveaway program, seems like I read, we spent $8 million per job that was created. Different amounts result in a different number of jobs, but one of the things I've seen in talking to people in Texas who are involved in the education system is that when the president's so-called stimulus bill in January of 2009 was passed, and it was done, rammed through like the Obamacare bill was, it didn't seem the full support of America, but it had a majority in the House, it had a majority in the Senate, and so it passed. And I like to think I'm objective enough that I certainly acknowledge it didn't start in January of 2009 with President Obama. A good man, a smart man, he's not given credit for that, made a major mistake when President Bush trusted Hank Paulson. Paulson says, we're about to have a catastrophe, give me $700 billion, and I'll keep things on track, get things back on track. We don't give $700 billion to one man and say, go fix things. You don't do that in America. That's not what the country was founded for, but it was done. And as I understand it, about $250 billion of the $700 billion is around the amount that Hank Paulson squandered of the so-called stimulus or the bailout, TARP, whatever you want to call it. And ironically, if one wishes to look at things from a political standpoint, it was pretty amazing because a Republican administration provided $700 billion to mainly bail out people on Wall Street who had donated to Democrats 4-to-1 over Republicans. So what's so amazing is to hear people constantly talk about these rotten Republicans on Wall Street when the fact is they give to Democrats 4-to-1 over Republicans. So not only was it absolutely, in my mind, an immoral thing to do, to take people's hard-earned money and add it to money we borrowed from China and others to bail people out on Wall Street. That's not the America that was founded, that so much blood and treasure has been spent to establish. Wall Street executives, I got no problem as long as they're playing by the rules, they're not cheating people. If they make $100 million a year, I have no problem as long as they're playing fairly. But when they get greedy and end up being broke, I do think it's appropriate for them to do what Americans are supposed to do and what is set out in the Constitution to do, called bankruptcy. And AIG sounds like they were making money in every department except the credit default swaps. Well, gee, that's what happens when you sell what is in effect insurance against a catastrophic event, which would be the failure of the mortgage-backed securities to have the value that was paid for them. You insure against that. You take what amount to premiums. You put no money in reserve to insure against the event you took money to insure against, and then are shocked someday when people want to make a claim under that insurance, and you've done nothing but take profit. What a great business that was. Selling insurance to insure against mortgage-backed securities, not have the value paid for them, and not having to set aside a dime of that in a reserve account so that if somebody ever makes a claim, you got to pay it back. Now, there had to be a fun business. But again, it was immoral, it was irresponsible, and they should have been under the rules of insurance. If you're going to sell insurance, you've got to insure against the event you took money to pay off for, if that ever happens. It didn't happen. So AIG should have been allowed to go through bankruptcy. If they had enough assets, some thought they might, as they were certainly making a lot of money. If they had enough assets, they could reorganize, get creditors to agree, and come up with a plan for reorganization. The law is very clear. At least it used to before the auto bailout. But that's what should have happened. Goldman Sachs, even though those were the dear close friends of Hank Paulson, the worst Secretary of the Treasury this country has ever had until we got Tim Geithner. But now it's a close call. I'm not sure who is worse. But he bailed out his buddies at Goldman Sachs. They should have been allowed to go through reorganization if they could, and if not, then liquidation and bankruptcy. That is what the Constitution provides for, and it should have been allowed to happen. And I realize if that had happened, then those massive donations that the Democratic Party and President Obama normally, or that he got from Wall Street, wouldn't have come through for him. I realize that. But this is more than about political parties, more than about political donations. It's about the life and the existence of this country. Nobody should be too big to fail. If you can get big enough that the failure of your company or your bank hurts a lot of people, then it's going to hurt a lot of people. But that is the problem when the government becomes a player. We start becoming the lending institution. We start becoming the player in insurance, where we're going to be selling the insurance like we do with flood insurance. We're going to be guaranteeing all the home loans. Well, people have to be in the good graces of the federal government if they're going to be able to get what they want, because the federal government becomes the player, selling the insurance like flood insurance, selling or backing home mortgages. And then you have a catastrophe like we've witnessed for the last 3 years. It didn't have to happen, but it is what happens when a country moves toward being more socialistic, where the government runs everything. The GRE, government running everything. And that's what Obamacare was about, the GRE. That's what the President's stimulus bill in January of 2009 was about. We were told it was $800 billion. Turned out maybe more like $1 trillion. It was about the GRE, the government running everything. We heard with the President's stimulus bill in 2009, January, that if we did not pass the President's stimulus bill, the President told us, he made very clear, if you don't pass this bill, I'm warning you, unemployment could go as high as 8.5%. Well, 2.5 years later, that 8.5% looks pretty doggone good. That would have been nice. But it got up to 10, and we're back at 9.1 for months now. The numbers are bad, but what is worse is all those people that cannot find jobs. And the biggest reason is because we have a government that thinks it is the answer. When it's the problem, it's not the answer. When the government becomes the player and tries to be the player and referee, it doesn't work. When the government is so busy being a player as well as referee, it can't do its referee job very well. And so you have people like Madoff who get away for years with bilking people out of billions of dollars, life savings. Should never have happened. If the federal government were more interested in being the referee, making sure people play fair, Madoff couldn't have gotten away with it for that long. When the government wants to run health care, as we do with Medicare and Medicaid, it becomes the problem, not the solution. And now we have seniors who are scared to death because they see what's happening. The president gets his bill, the Obamacare health bill passed, and it has provision for $500 billion to be cut from Medicare. And then AARP, after supporting that bill that cut $500 billion from Medicare, has the unmitigated gall to encourage people that are sending AARP money to notify their congressman that we don't want any cuts to Medicare. Well, I've gotten those petitions, and my response is that if you're part of AARP and you don't want cuts to Medicare, then I'm so glad you're now off the AARP team and you now support what I do. Because AARP sold the seniors down the road. Why would they do that? Well, let's look. Gee, they made, I believe it was in 2008, one big health insurance company made around $92 million clear profit, another 112 or so million profit. And then you have AARP that made over $400 million in clear profit from the sale of their supplemental insurance. I had a proposal that would have given seniors the choice. You can stay on Medicare, or you can choose to have us buy you private insurance that covers everything. You won't need any supplemental insurance. It will cover everything, but it will have a high deductible. $3,500 was the proposal, but I'm not married to that. If there's another figure that would end up being better from an accounting standpoint in the long run, could do that. But the proposal was $3,500. And then for that, we will put the $3,500 cash in the seniors' health care account for each of those 30 million or so homes that have people on Medicare and Medicaid. So then you have a debit card coded to only pay for health care, and the senior, for the first time since the 60s, will finally be in control of their own health care, making their own decisions. And we get the government out of the way of making decisions. Oh, no, you can't have that medication. Oh, no, you can't see that doctor. Oh, no, you can't have that treatment. And what we're seeing is the early stages of what ultimately happens when the government controls health care. It's lists. And lists mean rationing. And as I've heard from people who have lived in Canada and England, one man from Canada whose father, he said he needed a heart bypass operation. They put him on the bypass list, and 2 years later he had not gotten his bypass, and so he died. If he'd been in the United States, he would probably still be alive today. One secretary in my district told me about her mother getting breast cancer, but she had to get on a list in order to get the mammogram, had to get on a list to get the treatment, get on a list, have therapy, get on a list for surgery, all those things that came with it. And as a result of all those lists, she said, my mother died because she was in England. I was found to have cancer. I had immediate treatment. She's a secretary. She got treatment. She got the surgery and treatment, and she says, I'm alive because I was in the United States. My mother died because she was in England. Well, unfortunately, there are people who love people but think that by the government running health care, which will inevitably lead to rationing of health care, that somehow that's a better thing. Our health care system needs work. It needs to be fixed. But the the thing we should be doing is not having the government become the ultimate, the biggest player and referee in health care. We need to get the government out of being the player and get them back in the business of being the referee. At the same time, we need to get the health insurance companies out of the business of being health managers and back in the business of selling insurance. And you do that if we can move forward health savings accounts. The young people of today in their 20s and 30s start putting away money in their own health savings account. Let that build. There shouldn't be any limits on how much you can put in, but it ought to be a requirement. You can never take it out. You can give it to your kids, gift it to charities for a health savings account for those who can't provide it themselves. But once it becomes a health savings account, cash, that's where it stays until it's spent on health care. Leave it to your children when you die. Leave it to other charities who have people who need health care and go in their health savings account. Because once we do that, kids in their 20s and 30s, indications are by the time they're 65, 70 years old, not only will they not need, they won't not only not want Medicare, they won't need it because they'll have enough money in their account. They can do whatever they want to, have whatever health care they need. But that's not the end-all solution. We don't have free market forces at work in health care. That's why costs keep going up, one of the reasons. Another reason is the tremendous advances that have been made in medicine that are now slowing down. The great people who have been attracted to the health care, brilliant doctors and nurses, people in the health care industry, they're so smart. But we're already seeing the quality of people applying not at the level it once was. And why should it? When this government intervenes and prevents people from being compensated properly. But until we get free market forces at work in health care, we're not going to fix health care. And you cannot have competition in health care as long as we have our existing system where nobody knows what anything costs. You ask, what does an MRI cost? Well, it all depends, you're told. What does a room with a single bed in your hospital cost? Well, it all depends. We can't really say. You have Blue Cross, you have this, that, you have Medicaid, you have Medicare. Are you paying cash? It all depends. You can't fix health care when there's no competition. Growing up in Mount Pleasant, Texas, it was no secret. We went between 2 and actually eventually 3 different doctors' offices. We loved the doctors. They're great doctors. My mother passed away at 91, and my dad's still alive. But I recall growing up, we'd go to one doctor. Why? I thought we were going to this other doctor. Well, they raised their price, and they're both great doctors. Well, yeah, they are. I love them both. But so we would go. When one would raise their price, we'd go back to the other doctor. You can't do that now. You don't know what a doctor charges. I've talked to doctors who would love to tell people what they charge, but it all depends. Whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, what insurance. And then the most unfair cut of all is if you come in and you're too poor to have insurance and you're not eligible for Medicare or Medicaid, then they're going to sit down with you and work out a payment plan for an amount that is normally many times more than the insurance companies would have ever had to agreed to pay. Well, that's not right. Somebody comes in with cash, they ought to be able to get it cheaper than Blue Cross or cheaper than other methods of payment. They're coming in with cash. In a good scenario, that's the way it'd be. And if everyone had a health savings account that covered the high amount of the deductible of their catastrophic insurance, that's the way it would be. Because you would call up the doctor, the hospital, and say, I need to come in. How much do you charge? Under a bill I proposed, they'd have to tell you. Find it online. They'd have to be posted. This is how much we charge. And they have to know before they come. Then you could get competition. You've got your debit card coded to only cover health care. And so you then care about how much things cost. You can't find a whole lot of people that care how much health care costs anymore because they're not paying it. What does it matter if the cost goes up 10 times? And then you've got seniors, many of whom are ARP members. They're paying their dues. They got their supplemental insurance. And how tragic that ARP didn't mind $500 billion cut to Medicare when, gee, let's think about that. If there's a massive cut to Medicare and ARP sells supplemental insurance to cover what Medicare doesn't, I wonder if maybe they might think they would sell more insurance. Maybe that's why they would support a bill that cut Medicare by $500 billion. The games that have been played around this town really need to stop. We've gotten this country in trouble. But they're not going to stop with the president spending every day traveling around the country demonizing Congress for not passing his bill, his law, when he doesn't even know what's in his bill. I do. I read the whole thing. And I'm told there may not be anybody else in the House or Senate that's read every page of the president's bill like I did. Well, if the president would read it, he's obviously a smart enough man. He would see that a lot of his claims do not have the merit he thinks they do. Or whoever's putting those words in his teleprompter thinks they do. On education, the stimulus bill, we're told it was going to create so many jobs. It was going to build bridges, fix bridges. And it didn't do those things. And so now, 2.5 years later, the president makes the same speeches. That's got to be good for the speechwriters, because they could go back and take the same speeches that the president gave in January of 2009. You need to pass this bill. Got to pass this bill right now, right away, and then it'll build bridges. It'll fix these bridges. It'll hire people, get school teachers back, law enforcement. Well, those were all said in January of 2009. I'm wondering if we shouldn't go back and compare those speeches and see if they hadn't just cut some of those speeches and pasted them. Hey, it worked. They got Congress in January of 2009 to pass the massive stimulus bill. But as I've talked to educators around Texas, I found something that was deeply saddening and a bit maddening. There was some very limited amount of the $1 trillion in the president's stimulus bill, so-called, in January of 2009, that went to hire teachers. I've met young people who were hired as teachers, and I'm thrilled when young people are able to get jobs. It's a good thing. But then I've talked to different educators who said it's so tragic. You know, the stimulus money ran out, so we had to let teachers go. If you don't keep paying the stimulus money, then we don't get to keep those same teachers. Well, that ought to tell us something. The stimulus money was not. The stimulus money was not stimulus. If it had been stimulus, it would have stimulated things to the point that those teachers that were hired 2.5 years ago would have stimulated enough in the economy that they would be able to keep those jobs. But the stimulus bill in January of 2009 was not. Nor was the stimulus bill of January of 2008 under President Bush. They did not work. They don't work. That's not the way to stimulate. So then what really breaks my heart is when I find out people my age in their 50s people in their 40s who have been teaching for 20, 25, 30 years. And because they do, and because of the payment structure in education, they make a little more as they go along. And lo and behold, the federal government comes in and says, here's a bunch of stimulus money, not that much in the scheme of $1 trillion, but we'll give you a little bit, hire some new teachers. They hire new young teachers. They're working for cheaper than the older, experienced, well-trained teachers. So what happens when the stimulus money that didn't stimulate anything runs out? It's rather tragic. People who have families, who've committed their lives to education, have lost their jobs. I've heard from those people. Good teachers, good educators, but when they look at it, gee, this stimulus allowed us to hire these young new teachers, these experienced teachers that have a heart for the students, well-trained, well-educated. They're costing a little more. Let's let them go. How tragic that this body would pass a bill under Speaker Pelosi intending to help education, and as a result of the misguided attempt to help education, we've driven out many of our best, most experienced, most caring teachers. I've talked to young people that have gotten a job. They don't intend to stay teachers all that long. They're hoping they can find something else. So you have people who committed their lives to education, losing their jobs because of a stimulus bill that wasn't for young teachers who don't plan to stay teachers. They don't like teaching. They want to do something else. This body needs to get back to the original purpose of the Constitution. The purpose of the Constitution was to have a limited government. And that government would be a referee. It would make sure people and businesses in America played fair. It would not guarantee equal results, but it would guarantee opportunity to be fair and equal. And it was a long way from doing that until the wonderful works that were accomplished by the efforts of Martin Luther King, Jr. So we were on track. More equality of opportunity. But now it's as if some people think, no, Dr. King wanted equal results. No, he didn't. He wanted people judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. We made great, tremendous strides, but when a government wants to guarantee equal outcomes instead of equal opportunity, it becomes a tyrannical government. It becomes the player and not the referee. The other thing we're supposed to do is provide for the common defense. And that means not checking in our brain before we come to work every day. That means in every executive agency charged with providing for defense, you don't suddenly declare that the only people who can advise us about that tiny percent of radical Islamists, tiny percentage of the overall Muslim population, the only ones that can advise us about those radicals are people that really understand that mentality. We want people from the Muslim Brotherhood who want to take over the country, take over the world, have a united caliphate under Sharia law, to be the ones to advise us on how we deal with radical Islam. Although this administration has now made extremely clear, Attorney General Holder has made clear, Secretary Napolitano has made clear, we really don't want to offend those who want to kill us and destroy our way of life by referring to them as radical Islamists. Let's call them violent extremists. But when you look at what they've said and you look at what they've done and want to do, it's because of their sick beliefs in what being a Muslim means. And an even further tragedy is the fact that we have allowed people with organizations who have supported terrorism to be advisors to this administration, to this Justice Department, to this intelligence community, to this Department of State. We've got foxes in the henhouse. We don't need to pass the President's so-called jobs bill. This will do more to drive up the cost of oil and gas because this President doesn't understand that the 4 pages of deductions that he repeals in here will put independent oil and gas producers out of business. He doesn't understand that 94% of the oil and gas wells that are drilled on the land in the continental U.S. are drilled by independent oil and gas producers. He doesn't understand that when you eliminate their ability to raise capital, those wells will no longer be drilled. The major oil companies that the President demonizes and says he's going after will not only not drill all of those wells and produce all the oil and gas, they can produce the exact same amount and make massive amounts more in profit. So the one thing the President says he wants to do, that's page 151 through 154 of his bill, has the exact opposite effect. It will increase revenues, profits for major oil companies because it will drive out the independent oil and gas producers. Not to mention the millions of jobs that we'll lose by doing that. Now, when I came to Congress 6.5 years ago, I was concerned that there was not enough natural gas to continue to produce electricity with it, even though it is the most clean-burning thing that we've got. It would be wonderful, I thought, if you could do that. We just don't have enough because you've also got to have natural gas. It's a feedstock that you have to have in order to produce so many of the plastics, so many of the goods that are now so important to all Americans and to health care and to transportation. So if you're using natural gas to produce electricity, provide energy, then it's going to drive up those costs. Well, then science and necessity being the mother of invention, we hone our ability to horizontally drill. Hydraulic fracking allows us to get gas that we couldn't get otherwise. And now, depending on who you believe, we got 100, 300 years of natural gas. Some of us have been told that possibly the largest deposit of natural gas just may be off the west coast of Florida, and nobody's allowed to drill there. We find out that the Marcellus Shale up in the northeast producing jobs for people, unless our friends across the aisle are successful in killing those efforts to drill for that gas. Haynesville Shale down Louisiana, East Texas where I am. Barnett Shale, northwest Texas. These other gas finds are so extraordinary, I now fully support my Democratic friend Dan Boren's efforts to encourage people to convert cars to natural gas, to encourage manufacturers to produce cars that will run on natural gas. It'll be cheaper than gasoline. Some people identify greatly with the Tea Parties. I think they've been demonized when the people I see at those tea parties, all races, all ages, but they seem to have one thing in common. They're all paying income tax, and we're down to about 50% of the country that's doing that. People that come out at the tea parties, that's the one commonality. They pay taxes. They pay income tax. And as a result of that, they'd like to see less government. So some have been surprised that I would support something that was not free market totally, because I'm a free market kind of guy. But the overriding concern for this body, the oath that we take, should be to make sure we provide for the common defense. We have been sending trillions of dollars overseas when so much of that money finds its way into hands of those who hate us, want to destroy our way of life. They don't think that people should have freedom to choose, because if you give freedom to choose, they think, their religious beliefs are, that you'll slip into degradation and then you'll be part of a nation that needs to be destroyed. Well, it happens. When you give people freedom of choice, just as I believe God did to start with, some are going to choose to do wrong. It's going to happen. We're all going to make mistakes. Some are going to do so intentionally. That's when you need a government to enforce rules of fair play to make sure that we provide for the common defense so that people can freely practice peaceful religious beliefs. But we've been sending all that money year after year, growing more and more dependent on overseas oil. When President Carter created this new monstrosity, a couple of them, one called the Department of Education, another called the Department of Energy, and every year that the Department of Energy has existed, their goal has been to reduce the dependency on foreign oil, and every year they fail at their job more than they did the year before. Every year. No matter how many billions, hundreds of billions of dollars they throw at alternative energy rather than letting the free market play, it's not working. But the reason I would support encouraging people to convert cars to natural gas, I'd like to buy a car from the factory in the United States that runs off natural gas. We do need infrastructure where you can pull up to a gas station and get natural gas instead of gasoline. But I support it because if we do that, I now see we could be 100% energy independent. It would save lives of our most treasured possessions in this country, the American people. The men and women that go give their lives for their country. When we have funded terrorism, not intentionally, but by paying people who hate our own country for their oil when we could get off of it. And if we get on natural gas for 100 years, there's going to be time to develop. I know some people think it's not possible. I really do think we could eventually come up, somebody will, with a way to hold electricity. Some laugh at that. Shoot, the late Ted Kennedy laughed about having a strategic defense shield of rockets. That's Star Wars. And lo and behold, it's possible. It's happening. Well, until President Obama reneged on our agreement with Poland that cost so many of their political lives in Poland, who supported the missile defense that would stand between us and Iranian missiles. And we turned our backs on them, stabbed them in the back. Well, we're at risk, and it's time to quit sending money to countries that hate us. As I've often said, you don't have to pay people to hate you. They'll do it for free. You don't have to pay them. And yet we keep sending money to people who hate our guts, and it doesn't cause them to like us. It causes them to not only hate us, but to have total contempt because of how stupid we are, that we know they hate us and we still keep giving them money. Bullies on a playground who demand lunch money from another student don't develop admiration, love, and respect for students who give them their lunch money. They still hate them. They still don't think anything of them. That's not the way to deal with bullies. The way to deal with bullies is to make sure that if you have to band together as a government, as an educational administration, and just decide we're not going to let bullies prevail, then you do that. You can do it in schools. You can do it in the world by having a government that is strong enough militarily that what it says it can back up. You don't do that when you make contractual agreements, as we did with Mubarak. I'm not a President Mubarak fan. I was not a Gaddafi fan. But this administration had agreements with both of those people. They turned their backs on them, and now it appears we have radical Islamists that are taking over in those countries, and they will hate us more than Gaddafi did, because at least Gaddafi was afraid of us. And then we had a hearing yesterday in Judiciary Committee. Secretary Napolitano came over. It's not made the mainstream media. They'll probably never touch it. But it ought to rock people's lives if they see what is going on with this administration. Can't use the word radical Islam. That might offend people that want to kill us. When the fact is, if we address radical Islam, we will protect the moderate, the vast majority of Muslims who are moderate, who want to live in peace. The radicals take over, they're the first ones, could be the first ones they go after, as well as liberal reporters. They'll take them out. Gays, they'll take them out. You would think that people for gay rights would be on the side of those of us who want to go after radical Islam. But instead, seems to be strange bedfellows in combining against those who want to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So we do some digging, a couple of sleepless nights doing research. We find out the Homeland Security Department has people in its midst who are advising it. We find out, there's an article about it, can be found on the internet. We find out that there was a seminar that was to be given by two of the leading experts on radical Islam that was going to be given to law enforcement, and CARE, a named co-conspirator supporting terrorism, named as a co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trial that should have been prosecuted, but this administration says they're friends, we're not going after them. CARE complains to the White House, to this administration, and they cancel the briefing. And the word we're reading is that, apparently they're rewriting the rules so that people in our intelligence of this administration, people in Homeland Security, people in the Justice Department, people in the White House can only be briefed. They're rewriting the rules, and what we're told they'll end up saying is, you can't do the briefing if you're part of the government. So if you're in the government and you're not Muslim and don't have sympathies for radical Islam, then you'll be prevented from briefing others, despite the fact you may have spent your whole adult life studying this terrorism since 1979, when we saw it first come after us in Iran, after President Carter proclaimed this man of peace. Ayatollah Khomeini was coming in, and he has done more to create hatred, to create violence than any leader I'm aware of in the last 50 years. President Carter thought he'd be a man of peace. Wrong, he wasn't. Nor is the President Khomeini, nor is Ahmadinejad. And then you find out that the president of ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America, who has ready access to the White House. In fact, when the president was in the inner sanctum of the State Department, when the president gave his speech to try to upstage Netanyahu the day before Netanyahu was coming from Israel to the United States and ultimately to address this body, the president of ISNA, named co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trial, 105 counts of conviction, in which the named co-conspirators should have been pursued after those initial convictions. He's advising the president on his speech about Israel. He's giving remarks on how the president's doing. He's got the president's ear. He's got the State Department's ear. He's got national security's ear. And in fact, we see from the Deputy National Security Advisor's own transcript of his own remarks that are on the White House website, the Deputy National Security Advisor commends the president of this named co-conspirator to fund terrorism for leading prayers for the Iftar celebration last year at the White House. We haven't seen anybody in the mainstream media wants to talk about the fact that al-Awlaki, that this administration killed with a drone just not that long ago, was leading prayers for Muslim staffers on Capitol Hill. Foxes are in the henhouse, and they're given more and more authority. We found out yesterday that, it was Homeland Security that gave a secret security clearance to Mohammed El-Ibiyari, from accounts, a very nice gentleman. But if you read his writings, he thinks the world of the Muslim philosopher on whom Osama bin Laden relied so heavily for being barbaric, for killing innocents. The man that is part of the inner circle and now has been elevated to the National Homeland Security Advisory Council of the Secretary of Homeland Security, thinks that he was a man of peace. He was executed in the 60s, but his writings fully supported what Osama bin Laden was doing. They support what radical Islam is doing, and that's why they constantly point to his writings from the 50s and 60s. We also find, and I've got a flyer in my materials here, that Mohammed El-Ibiyari was one of the featured speakers for the tribute to a man of vision, the Ayatollah Khomeini, just recent years ago. And he's been given a secret security clearance. Then I find out 2 days ago, he's also working with the ACLU to attack from the outside, to demand materials that will tell them about the sources and methods of how we try to get some intelligence on the people that want to destroy and kill us and ruin our way of life and create a one-world caliphate for some dictator like the Ayatollah Khomeini or Khomeini over there now in Iran. And we're giving people like that access. And then I find out this week, and it's written, it's now on the internet, you can read the story, that this same man used his security clearance. He's allowed to access secured databases from his home computer, and he accesses a secured database called the State and Local Intelligence Community Database, called SLIC for short. And he pulled off some material that said on it for official use only, and then was shopping that to mainstream media in this country to try to condemn people in Texas for being concerned under Governor Perry as being Islamophobes. And then we find that the OIC, that has been so powerful, 57 states, that actually in 2007 they said that the most fearful terrorism that exists, and these are their words, is Islamophobia. They created the term Islamophobia. They're donating hundreds of thousands and millions to some of our best educational institutions to go after people who are concerned not about Islam, not about the 95, 99%, whatever it is, of Muslims who are peace-loving. But if you want to go after the 1% that wants to kill us and make this country into a caliphate under Sharia law, you're an Islamophobe. And they're paying millions and millions to develop that terminology. And so the mainstream media will buy into it and come after anybody that says, look, there is a common thread that runs through those people who want to destroy our way of life, who want to take our young men and women in this country, radicalize them, and have them help them destroy the greatest, most freest country in the history of mankind. And this administration is bringing some of those foxes into the henhouse. So not only does this administration give a man who admires the inspiration for Osama bin Laden, who is a featured speaker for the tribute to Ayatollah Khomeini, he's given secret security clearance and now is using that as a political weapon, not just to go after people concerned about radical Islam, but also to go after an opponent of this president politically. It's time to wake up. It's time to be a referee, not a player. It's time to let the free market system drive the economy, create jobs, while we do what we're supposed to do, provide for the common defense. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.